You pour a glass of wine without thinking about it. You crack open a beer at the end of a long day, and your body relaxes before you've even taken the first sip. It's a reflex now, a ritual so old and so automatic that most people never stop to ask where it actually came from. The answer is stranger than you think. It doesn't start with agriculture. It doesn't start with a Neolithic farmer accidentally leaving grain in water for too long. It starts millions of years earlier, in the branches of trees, inside the body of a fruit-eating primate who was your ancestor long before humans existed at all. Your attraction to alcohol is not a modern habit. It is not even a human habit. It is older than your species, older than your genus, older than the ability to walk upright. And once you understand where it came from, you will never look at a glass of wine the same way again. For most of the last 10 million years, primates lived inside forests full of fruit, ripe fruit, rotting fruit, fruit that had fallen to the forest floor days earlier and had already begun to break down. And wherever sugar breaks down in the open air, wild yeast finds it. Fermentation begins, alcohol appears quietly inside the flesh of fruit that no one designed to be alcoholic at all. That means every primate ancestor who ever ate fallen fruit was, without knowing it, consuming small amounts of ethanol, not to get drunk, to eat. The alcohol was simply there, a byproduct of ripeness, a chemical signature of sugar breaking down into something a hungry animal's body could use. The question is not when your ancestors discovered alcohol. They never had to discover it. It was already inside their food. The real question is when their bodies got good at handling it, and what that adaptation cost them millions of years later. In 2015, biochemist Matthew Carrigan, then at the Santa Fe College and the University of Florida, led a study comparing the alcohol processing enzyme, ADH4, across 19 different primate species. What his team found was a single genetic mutation, one tiny change in the enzyme's structure that appeared roughly 10 million years ago in the shared ancestor of gorillas, chimpanzees, and humans. That one mutation made the enzyme roughly 40 times more efficient at breaking down ethanol. 40 times. Before that mutation, a primate eating fermented fruit would have felt sluggish, impaired, vulnerable to predators after a single piece of overripe fruit. After it, that same primate could metabolize the alcohol fast enough to keep eating, keep foraging, keep functioning. Carrigan's research suggested this wasn't an accident. It looked like natural selection, favoring the individuals who could handle alcohol-laced fruit without being knocked off their feet by it. The primates who processed ethanol efficiently could eat more fallen fruit, access more calories, and survive leaner seasons better than primates who couldn't. This is the foundation of what researcher Robert Dudley of the University of California, Berkeley named the drunken monkey hypothesis. Dudley's argument, developed over 2 decades of research, is that the modern human craving for alcohol is not a flaw or a coincidence. It is an inherited appetite, a leftover instinct from millions of years spent using the smell of fermentation as a locator beacon for ripe, calorie-dense food scattered across a forest canopy. Ethanol has a smell that travels. It drifts through air in a way that a piece of fruit hidden in leaves does not. A primate that could smell fermentation from a distance had an advantage over one that couldn't, because that smell meant food. Sometimes food that other animals hadn't found yet. Your nose, right now, still responds to that same chemical signature. That instinct never went anywhere. It just stopped being useful for finding dinner and started being useful for finding a bar. Move forward from 10 million years ago to roughly 13,000 years ago, and the story shifts from biology to behavior, from something your ancestors' bodies did without choosing to something they started doing on purpose. The oldest confirmed evidence of humans deliberately producing alcohol comes from Raqefet Cave near modern Haifa in Israel, a burial site used by the Natufians, a population of hunter-gatherers who lived across the eastern Mediterranean roughly 15,000 to 11,000 years ago. In 2018, archaeologist Li Lu of Stanford University, working with Danny Nadell of the University of Haifa, analyzed residue trapped inside stone mortars carved into the cave floor. What they found were starch granules and plant microfossils consistent with a multi-stage brewing process. Grain soaked in water, allowed to germinate into malt, then mashed, heated, and left to ferment with wild airborne yeast. This wasn't a farming society. The Natufians hadn't domesticated wheat or barley yet in any formal sense. They were still hunting and gathering, still moving with some seasonal flexibility, and they were already brewing something recognizable as beer, deliberately as part of funeral rites for their dead. 30 individuals were buried at Reykjavik Cave, laid to rest on beds of flowering plants. And the beer, Lou's team concluded, was very likely part of how the living marked that loss. Alcohol's first confirmed appearance in the archaeological record isn't tied to farming. It's tied to grief, to ritual, to the specific human need to mark the moment when someone is gone. That detail changes the entire story. Before alcohol was ever a commodity, before it was ever currency or entertainment, it was something people made to sit with death. Halfway across the world and roughly 4,000 years later, a separate population arrived at a similar idea with no contact with the Natufians at all. At Jiahu, a Neolithic village site in China's Henan province, residue analysis published by biomolecular archaeologist Patrick McGovern of the University of Pennsylvania Museum identified a fermented beverage dating to approximately 7,000 BCE, made from rice, honey, and hawthorn fruit or grape. Not quite beer, not quite wine, not quite mead. Something in between, brewed by people working out fermentation from first principles, with no shared knowledge linking them to what the Natufians had done in a cave in the Levant thousands of years earlier and thousands of kilometers away. And nearly 2,000 years after that, at Chaotu, also in China, archaeologist Jiajing Wang, then affiliated with Stanford University, published findings in 2021 showing that residents there were brewing rice-based beer as part of burial ritual in ceramic vessels surrounded by human graves around 8,700 years ago. The pattern repeats itself in western Iran too. At Godin Tepe in the Zagros Mountains, McGovern's earlier work in the 1990s identified chemical residue of wine dated to roughly 3,500 to 3,100 BCE inside ceramic jars, alongside a separate vessel in the same room that tested positive for barley beer. 4 independent regions, 4 unconnected populations, all arriving at fermentation, all tying it to ritual, celebration, or mourning, all within a rough window of human history where something in how people lived had shifted enough to make deliberate brewing worth the effort. Picture a moment at Reykjavik Cave, roughly 13,000 years ago. A small group has gathered at the mouth of the cave in the weeks after burying one of their own. The mortars carved into the limestone floor still hold the last traces of the brew they made days earlier, grain-soaked until it sprouted, mashed by hand, left to sit in water while wild yeast, invisible and unplanned, did the rest of the work. Someone scoops the liquid out with a hollowed gourd. It is thick, sour, barely resembling anything you would recognize as beer, and almost nobody drinks it for the taste. They drink it because the person they buried mattered, because a gathering like this calls for something shared, something passed hand to hand that marks the moment as different from an ordinary day. The mild intoxication that follows isn't the point. The ritual is the point. The alcohol is simply what makes the ritual feel heavier, more deliberate, more worth remembering. That is the oldest known reason your species ever made alcohol on purpose. Not to get drunk, to mourn together, and to feel, at least for a moment, less alone in it. Modern research adds a strange layer to this. In 2017, psychologist Robin Dunbar of the University of Oxford published findings on what he called the social bonding effects of alcohol, showing that moderate ethanol consumption triggers the release of endorphins in a pattern that closely mirrors the neurochemical response to laughter, physical touch, and communal singing. Dunbar's research, conducted across pubs and social drinking groups in the United Kingdom, found that people who drank together in moderate social settings reported significantly higher feelings of closeness and trust with their companions than people in equivalent non-drinking social settings. Alcohol, in other words, doesn't just relax you. It activates the same biological machinery your body uses to bond with other people. That machinery is ancient. It predates alcohol itself as a human invention. What your ancestors stumbled onto at Reykjavik Cave and Jiahu and Chaotu wasn't a clever trick. It was a shortcut into a bonding system that evolution had already built for entirely different reasons, and once they found it, they never let it go. Every toast at a wedding, every drink shared after a funeral, every glass raised to celebrate a birth, all of it is running on the same neurochemical wiring the Natufians activated in a cave 13,000 years ago. Then agriculture spread, and everything about alcohol changed scale. Grain surplus meant brewing could move from occasional ritual to routine production. In ancient Sumer, beer became a form of payment. Workers building temples and monuments were compensated partly in rations of it. In ancient Egypt, beer was considered so fundamental to daily life that it was included in offerings to the dead, alongside bread, so the deceased would not go without either in the afterlife. The Code of Hammurabi, carved in Babylon around 1754 BCE, included specific regulations governing the price and quality of beer sold in taverns, evidence that alcohol had become significant enough to the economy that the state felt the need to control it. Wine in the Mediterranean world became tied to status, to religion, to Dionysian ritual in Greece, and to trade networks that stretched across the entire ancient world. What began as a burial rite in a Levantine cave had become, within a few thousand years, a pillar of ancient economies, a form of currency, a religious sacrament, and a tool of state control, all traceable back to the same biological appetite your primate ancestors developed for a completely different reason 10 million years earlier. And here is the part that should stop you. The gap between then and now hasn't closed. It has widened, dramatically, in a way your body was never built to handle. A piece of fermented fruit on a forest floor might have contained an alcohol concentration of 1 or 2%, diluted inside fiber and water and natural sugar that slowed its absorption. Natufian beer, cloudy and thick with grain particulate, was almost certainly weaker and harder to drink quickly than anything sold today. Modern spirits regularly reach 40% alcohol by volume, refined, concentrated, stripped of everything that once slowed your ancestors down. The reward pathway that once rewarded a primate for finding a rare patch of fermented fruit is the exact same pathway lighting up when you take a shot of liquor engineered to deliver that same chemical signal at a concentration nothing in 10 million years of evolution ever prepared your body for. You are running software that was calibrated for 1 or 2% alcohol content, diluted and slow, and you are feeding it 40%, refined and immediate. That mismatch, more than anything else, is why alcohol misuse exists at the scale it does today. Not because humans are weak, because the appetite is real, ancient, and deeply wired, and the modern world figured out how to concentrate the thing it evolved to want. Sit with that for a moment. The instinct that makes a glass of wine feel good, the warmth, the loosening, the sense of connection to whoever is sitting across from you, that instinct was never built for wine. It was built for a fruit-eating primate in a forest 10 million years ago, learning to survive on whatever sugar it could find before it rotted completely. It became a burial ritual in a cave in Israel 13,000 years ago. It became currency in Sumer and sacrament in Greece, and regulation under Hammurabi's law. And now it sits in a glass on your counter, unremarkable, 2 feet away, carrying all of that history inside it without you ever having to think about where it came from. Your ancestors chased the smell of fermentation through a forest canopy to find food. Later ones brewed it deliberately to mourn their dead. You just have to open the bottle. If you made it this far, you are exactly the kind of person this channel exists for. We make videos like this one every week about ancient human behavior, about what your body still remembers, about the gap between the world you were built for and the one you actually live in. If that is something you want more of, hit subscribe. It costs you nothing, and it tells the algorithm that this kind of storytelling is worth keeping alive. See you in the next one.